So let's talk about some of Judicial Watch's attempts at investigating and getting to the truth about some of the circumstances then surrounding the Iran deal itself. I know for a fact that we have a Freedom of Information Act request out about we made a $400 million cash payment to Iran as part of a $1.7 billion settlement payment that we ended up making to them. And then within a very, very short period of time after that, a number of hostages were released by Iran back to the United States.
I think literally as one plane landed, the other one started to taxi.
Took off.
Right.
Yeah. So you talk with me a little bit about that, what you think about that, and what sort of answers or non-answers we've been able to get.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, we paid ransom to terrorists. I mean, let's just call it what it is, right? You can keep putting lipstick on the pig, but eventually the pig gets very angry. It's kind of a waste of time, right? It really doesn't accomplish anything. And so the Obama administration paid ransom for hostages. And you can talk about it any other way you want to, but that's what the net result is. And that's the message that goes around the world, is that a weak, morally flexible administration was willing to do stuff that we usually fight vigorously against.
Right.
It actually encourages people to take Americans as hostages. Because you get what you subsidize, right? That's one of the laws of economics.
Yep.
And so when you subsidize hostage takers and end up funding the largest state sponsor of terror in the world, guess what's going to happen?
This sort of thing. Yeah.
This is not tough to figure out. And so Obama was looking for his Nixon in China moment, I guess, or some other sort of weird parallel. And he was going to kind of force this through no matter what. You even have people, like Ben Rhodes at the National Security Council, essentially admitting in writing in interviews that he deliberately misled people, that he lied, that he manipulated, all this sort of really unseemly gamesmanship to con people into buying this thing.
Yeah, there was sort of a glowing profile. I think it was in the New York Times Magazine.
Right.
A really lengthy interview with him where, whether willingly or unwillingly, he sort of admitted that, yeah, I was misleading people.
Yeah, and the guys, I mean, what are his credentials, or what's his background to be doing this sort of thing and running these sort of operations? Pretty slim. I mean, he's kind of a failed third-string novel writer kind of thing, and that's fine. People can be writers, nothing wrong with that. But when you take somebody like that and put them in charge of national, and not for that matter, international policy, and you're deliberately deceiving other government agencies, other government officials, and the public, and then you're moving around, billions of dollars. This is a level of craziness and irresponsibility that just, the problem is I don't see anybody pursuing them. I don't see Attorney General Sessions, now looking at it and saying, wait a minute, I think we were defrauded. I think we were misled. And so we need to pursue this via a grand jury. I mean, where's that effort?
Yeah.
Maybe it's going on. I don't know. Maybe.
I mean, because you're saying, we give them $400 million, $1.7 billion total in this settlement. Yeah. In exchange, hostages get released. To keep this deal sort of afloat,
let's decouple that and just look at the deal.
Yeah.
So normally in a deal, I give something to you of value, and in exchange you give me something of value, right?
Right. So that we both
whether that's goods, services, money. Right. But there's this idea that you enter into a contract, and there's this sort of fair trade or negotiation. And I do it with free will and intellect, and you do, and we arrive at something.
Right.
I don't see. I mean, can you articulate for me what we got out of the Iran deal?
Well, I mean, because broadly, there's this initial hostage payment, right? There's us pumping the brakes on pursuing their sort of proxy terrorist organization.
Right.
And then there's the lifting of the sanctions that ends up sending, probably hundreds of billions of dollars total back into their economy, which they use to...
But I mean, even with respect to the nuke operations itself, right? They collect their own samples and give them to us, right? They get 21 days notice inspection before anybody's allowed to set foot at one of the facilities. this is madness. You know, where's the hammer? Where's the big angle or advantage to us? I don't see it. All I see is this frantic effort to make nice with people who routinely chant in their parliament, "Death to America."
Right.
I need somebody to explain it to me because I still don't get it.
In the wake of Eric Schneiderman's resignation as Attorney General of New York, some of his longtime friends on the left are professing shock. You've heard them. "We just can't believe it," they say. "How could a man so publicly committed to feminism beat women? It just doesn't make sense." But of course, it makes perfect sense. Self-righteousness is always a marker for secret creepiness. The people yelling the loudest are usually hiding the most. Keep that in mind the next time you hear some Democratic politician lecturing you about your moral inferiority. That's the guy you need to watch carefully. Chances are he's up to something awful behind closed doors. Hypocrisy isn't just a feature of modern liberalism, it's the heart of modern liberalism. Ever wonder how people who advocate for abortion can say they stand for children? How a movement that demonizes an entire race can claim to oppose racism? The same way Al Gore can travel by private jet while trying to ban your SUV. Because consistency does not matter to the left. Only virtue matters. We're good people, therefore we must rule. You are not, therefore you must obey. Al Gore doesn't believe he's a hypocrite. Eric Schneiderman probably doesn't think he is either. You can't commit sin if your intentions are pure, and liberals believe their intentions are the purest. If that sounds like theology and not public policy, that's because it is theology. Modern liberalism is a religious movement. It's a replacement for the Protestant Christianity that the left works so hard to undermine and destroy. Liberals are speaking the language of faith, albeit a faith without God. This is the main reason that right and left talk past each other, the reason our public debates are so weird and unsatisfying. One side arrives with facts and stats and arguments. The other brags about its decency. One side is trying to convince, the other is trying to convert. You can beat a liberal in an argument, but you can never convince him that you won. He cares much more deeply than you do, and therefore he knows he's right, by definition, and nothing can convince him otherwise. Somewhere tonight, Eric Schneiderman is marinating in his shame, probably unshaven and alone. His career is over, his reputation is destroyed. He faces years of potential legal action. He is a broken man. He is in agony. And yet, on some level, despite all of that, Eric Schneiderman still knows he's a better person than you are. Seth Barron is associate editor of City Journal. He predicted in public on Twitter that Schneiderman would be exposed as a creep, and he said it last November. Yesterday, he tweeted this: "How did I know this and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio didn't?" Great question. We've asked him to come on and explain. Seth Barron joins us tonight. Seth, how did you know that? That was a remarkably prescient tweet last November.
Thanks, Tucker. You know, to me, it was just kind of, I thought it was just an open secret. I'd heard stories and rumors about Schneiderman for years. I'd been told by at least 3 or 4 different people since maybe 2009 that he is into rough sex with women, that he likes to date his staffers and is a little pushy with them, that he tried to kidnap a reporter and wouldn't let her out of his car on the way to, and said he was taking her to his apartment. So I sort of assumed that this was just, you know, common knowledge, more or less. Now, I'm not deeply involved in Albany politics or in New York City Democratic circles. I'm an editor for a moderately conservative magazine.
So you're not exactly in the loop at the highest levels of progressive New York, is what you're saying.
No, exactly. So that's why it seemed strange that everyone was saying, "Oh my God, this is the craziest thing we've ever heard."
But it's clearly not. I mean, so that you raise a really, I think, central question, which is, if you heard about it, is it plausible that the governor of the state, one of his closest allies, presumably one of his closest friends, Andrew Cuomo, had never heard of it?
It seems implausible to me. I mean, it seems implausible to me that any elected official in New York State hadn't heard it. I don't know what I can say. I mean, Andrew Cuomo has been, you know, steeped in New York State politics for 40 years. He basically has a private army. He keeps tabs on everything and everyone. He's extraordinarily paranoid.
Yes, I know.
So I would imagine that he would know everything that everybody's up to at all times.
He's a thoroughly bizarre person. I've dealt with him. No, I agree. That's exactly the word that comes to mind, and I don't use it lightly. He's paranoid. He's a control person. There's no doubt. So this is a little strange, though, because Schneiderman was the Attorney General. He wasn't just some functionary. He wasn't the night city editor at the Daily News. I mean, he was the chief law enforcement officer of the state. So if there's a suggestion that he kidnapped somebody, you'd think that one of his peers would follow up on it.
Well, you might think so, but at the same time, the New York State Attorney General has unique powers and is an immensely powerful figure. I don't think any Attorney General in any state Attorney General across the country has the kind of power that the New York Attorney General does. However, if you notice, over the last few years in New York State and New York City, there's been a lot of corruption investigations.
Yes.
But he has not been leading them. They've all been largely done by the feds. There's trials going on in Albany right now over, Sheldon Silver is going to be retried. Right. A number of Cuomo's associates, just where Joe Prococo was just convicted. This was federal. And in New York City, investigations of Bill de Blasio were largely being done by the federal government.
It's kind of funny. Meanwhile, this guy's suing everyone about global warming.
Global warming,
right.
Or coming up with ways to have pardon-proof indictments of Trump associates, or suing the vitamin industry. Yeah. Or
meanwhile, the cesspool around him goes unaddressed. Seth, thank you for that dispatch from New York. Not heartening, but fascinating.
Thanks, Tom.
And the judge also has a right to determine they went beyond that, even if Rosenstein attempted to give it to them. He also has a right to determine that by government misconduct, they have fatally tainted this case.
That was Rudy Giuliani, part of the president's legal team, weighing in on the judge overseeing Paul Manafort's case, who recently laid into Mueller's special counsel, demanding Rod Rosenstein's complete memos and accusing them of targeting the president. Our next guest agrees, adding it's time for Mueller to wrap up the probe once and for all. Former Naval Intel Officer Robert Charles served as Assistant Secretary of State under George W. Bush. He joins us now to explain. Robert, thanks for being here this morning. So you say it's time to wrap up the probe. How does that happen, and what can be done to force that hand?
Well, a great question, and I think Mr. Giuliani is probably right in everything that he says. I would focus the attention right now on Congress because there is a request presently pending that Mr. Rosenstein has not honored, and that is a request for the full scope memo that would allow the American people and the United States Congress to understand what this investigation actually was allowed to do. The remarkable part, honestly, is that this inquiry, which Congress has made, has been rebutted by the Deputy Attorney General, who says he's being extorted by Congress. And that's quite remarkable in the context of congressional oversight powers. There are 6 provisions in the Constitution. There are 18 statutes that validate this request, and to me it's just very surprising more than anything else why the Deputy Attorney General, which incidentally he's blocking the production of this document, which may be law enforcement sensitive, but they're fully entitled to get it under the law of the land. It's the exact same document that judge in Virginia is trying to get.
Yes.
So to me, if you get it, to wrap this whole thing up, you have to understand what this whole thing is.
Well, exactly.
And that means you need to get at it.
You're talking about a scope memo, which would have
Yes,
been produced by Rod Rosenstein, which gives the authority for Bob Mueller his left and right limits. Here's what you can and cannot investigate. And as Judge T.S. Ellis is reviewing the case in front of him, he wants to know if the charges being brought against Paul Manafort are within those guidelines, and right now he can't see that unredacted. That's what you're saying.
Right, and to me, although, in 12 days we'll know whether he gets that memo, the United States Congress also has an absolute right to that memo, and they have subpoena power, they have use immunity power, they have impeachment power over high-ranking officials, they have the power of contempt. Ultimately, it doesn't make sense for the Deputy Attorney General, who is a very smart guy, not to sit back, look at the, frankly, start with the oversight manual. Every American can Google the Congressional Research Service's Congressional Oversight Manual. Look in there. There's 150 pages of case law. Makes crystal clear that Congress has the right to that document.
Yep.
So why aren't they producing it? That's the mystery to me.
Well, Robert, do you believe that Rod Rosenstein is conflicted? I mean, he's been in the middle of this from the beginning. He's the one that helped recommend that Comey no longer be the FBI director. A lot of people are suggesting he's just too involved to be a fair arbiter of what Bob Mueller can and cannot do.
He's certainly in an awkward position. I know he's a smart guy. I think he has a gap in his understanding, and that may be the role that Congress plays in oversight. And, of course, he's responding on multiple fronts to criticism, but at the end of the day, it looks an awful lot like he is conflicted. And I think you have to ask yourself at some point, what's the right thing to do instead of what's the politically right thing to do, or what will cover Mueller's investigation for some additional period of time? You have to ask yourself, is this the right time to just wrap it up?
Well, it's interesting as these judges basically point out, as T.S. Ellis said, it looks like you're fighting for